We're here today to talk about, rendered ingredients and the truth about rendered ingredients and the pet food industry and the laws that surround it. Do you guys want to introduce yourself first? Susan?
Sure.
I'll
start.
Susan.
Go ahead, Susan. Go ahead. You start.
I run the website truthaboutpetfood.com.
Hello. I'm Daniel Orego with Pause for Change Foundation.
What was my game changer? My dog Allie, but basically I went through this evolution, as a pet parent where I thought I was doing the right thing. Allie, my dog Allie was having some challenges and I wasn't able to help her in the way that I thought I was. And so here I am thinking, oh my God, my dog's having problems. Now that should be where the problem gets solved normally. But when that doesn't happen, you give up or you put the dog down, which happens a lot. Or sometimes people are like me and they're like, well, hold on a second. This can't be right. Maybe I have to do something, become somebody other than I am now, go after information to find solutions. And you just start evolving naturally, evolving and changing, hearing new stories, and voices, new pieces of information that aren't necessarily secrets, but they just aren't part of the mainstream consciousness. And hey, if I'm not willing to accept the canned answer, then it's up to me to take action. And once I took action, I learned a bunch of stuff that I really can't unlearn. Now, Susan, I went through this process, kind of feeling blindly in the dark. But what I'd like to have happen in the future so that pet parents don't have to go through what I did, how can we make it easier for them? How do we give them the info that I struggled so hard to get access to and to learn? If you want to be a rock star consumer, what are the little things that we should be looking for? Can you tell them?
Well, you're not alone in your struggle to find information. The industry is set up to keep information from pet owners. We don't even know all of human food regulations are public information. Every food ingredient definition, all the laws governing it, they may be a little bit hard to find, and law is really boring to read, but they're all public information. And with pet food, they are not. They all go in this book. You can see this book, how thick it is, and it costs $120 a year. This private corporation, American Association of Feed Control Officials, owns the regulations and the definitions. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. Perhaps it's illegal because of freedom of information rights for U.S. citizens. Wow. But it's set up to be difficult for you to find the answers to your questions.
Wow. And Daniel, do you have anything to add about that?
Well, I think what Susan mentions is probably one of the most interesting points of departure for a consumer to kind of, grasp and get a hold of, understanding not just the regulatory side of this issue, but also sort of the practical application side, right? We talk a lot about how pet parents, pet owners want to make the best choices on behalf of the little kitty or little doggy that they take care of at home. And sometimes that's a challenge when you can't really understand what's in a bag or a can of commercial pet food. And one of the first steps to kind of getting that information is obviously, as Susan suggested, getting a hold of that AFCO book. Now, it is purchasable, but it's also a weighty tome of information. It's not easy to glean from that information what you should understand when making a consumer choice. Now, the great news is that pet parents today actually have access to more than they ever have before in this regard. Obviously, Susan's work at Truth About Pet Food goes a long way towards advancing that. Yeah. The other thing that's sort of interesting is that pet parents can now on their own begin to understand what the metabolic effects are of feeding a consumer kibble over the lifetime of a dog or kitty. And what I mean by that is you can actually see how a high carbohydrate commercially processed food impacts a dog. And you can do that by measuring the doggy or kitty's glucose and sort of watching that rise in insulin and glucose response from feeding the food. What's also really interesting now is that pet parents at home on their own can measure a dog or a cat's hemoglobin A1C, which is a very common metric in the human world to understand if one is pre-diabetic or diabetic. And the great news is these are things that pet parents can do electively on their own and start to collect the data that gives them a better picture of what's transpiring when they feed something that comes out of a can or out of a bag.
Yeah, and that's really important to know is that carbs, the impact. I know we're talking about a lot of these pet foods. They have these kibble-based foods that are made today, literally around 40 to 70% starches on a daily basis. If you had, if you had in 30 seconds or less really to talk about the impact or the ramifications for a dog or cat that has cancer, do you think this would be a problem?
Well, I mean, maybe one way to think about this is to contextualize it to what cats and dogs have eaten for the last 100,000 years of their evolution, right? We know that, as obligate and scavenging carnivores, cats and dogs' primary consumption in the wild will be things that they hunt and kill, or in the case of dogs, sometimes they'll eat something that's scavenged. But their access to carbohydrate would be very minimal. And if they had some, it would be perhaps seasonal or in the form of fibers. And so right there, we can sort of see that, feeding commercial kibbles doesn't comport with that evolutionary history, right? And so it's right there that you can start to begin to ask yourself the question, does it make sense to feed a diet that's not fresh, and B, a diet that's very, very high in high glycemic response carbohydrates? And one of the things that's so interesting about this is it's so darn difficult to evaluate these things just by looking at a bag of pet food. And that's actually something that Susan has worked on quite a bit up to this point, is to get greater transparency around that.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Susan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just, most pet foods are not food. They're feed, like cattle feed and chicken feed, sold in 50-pound bags and stored in a barn and fed on the ground, not meant to bring in your home. And they are the exact same ingredients, same quality of ingredients as used in chicken feed and cattle feed and pig feed. They are feed. There are exceptions to that. Thank goodness. There are pet foods that are labeled still, the same way, but they will have on their label human grade. Those are actually the only pet foods. The rest of them are dog feeds and cat feeds. The FDA openly allows pet feeds and livestock feeds to use diseased animals, non-slaughtered animals, euthanized animals as protein sources with no disclosure on the bag. As far as kibble, to date, there are no human grade kibble. They might use human edible ingredients, but we have not one kibble manufacturer has stepped up to try to get that human grade status, and they could. It's an extruded product, no different than cereal. And cereal is manufactured in human food facilities. So if anybody really wanted to, they could. They've never stepped up, nor has anybody ever stepped up and gone, okay, we're going to be transparent. Exactly, here's the quality of all of our ingredients. And nobody has ever provided that verification. So another drawback to me, I'm not real picky about the style. Because I feed my pets both commercial raw and home cooked. So I'm not so picky about the style. I just insist it's human grade. Right. Kibble is very processed. I don't like that with mine. Mine get minimally processed, but it has to be that good quality of ingredient. It has to be. I'm not rolling the dice there.
Yeah, and you say human grade, and that's really important. So can you tell everybody about this? What you put out once a year, an annual list that you can donate. You can buy is for as little as $5 or $10. You just donate to the Truth About Pet Food and all the work you're doing for the industry. And first of all, thank you for that work. But can you just tell everybody about how to find that list and what it's about? And
I do. That's how I keep a roof over my head, is the list, which is a list of pet foods that I would trust to feed my own pets. And I require each pet food is sent a list of questions. Depending on their answers, they also provide verification of every claim they make. If they claim it's human grade, I require them to send me invoices for everything. If they're claiming it's humanely raised, I require them to send me the verification documents for everything. So they've all been checked out, per what I would do and do for my own pets. And I'm pointing down here because my dog is right here going, I want to be on TV too.
Who's that?
So anyway, yes. And it's on the homepage of the website. The link is on the homepage of the website.
Truthaboutpetfood.com.
Yes.
Awesome. Daniel, real quick, what do you feed your pack? Real quick, what do you feed your dogs and cats?
Sure. They basically get the same thing. It's actually pretty simple. It's just ground turkey with the addition of some whole chia seeds, a little bit of psyllium husk, a little pumpkin, and then just a very basic vitamin and mineral mix that sort of covers all the bases there. So it's nothing particularly fancy. Yeah. At interval, I may rotate the protein sources, but they've done really, really well on that for, close to 5 years now. Awesome. And what's so interesting about it, and these are some of the sort of the key takeaways, that when pet parents start to move from processed foods to fresh foods, they'll notice some interesting things. One is that the skin and the coat improve dramatically. Additionally, the teeth don't require cleaning anymore because you don't have, with the exception of if there's a problem, but because you don't have the sugars in the food. And in addition to that, their stool reduces in volume dramatically, as does the number of times they have to go to the bathroom. So there's some very immediate effects that occur, not the least of which is the animals become much leaner and much more muscular in appearance. So they start to take on almost this athletic look as you start to include and ultimately subsume a commercial kibble diet with fresh foods.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. That's awesome. So, Susan and Daniel, you both have heard this story from me before. This is how, I would go into the pet store, started with the grocery store, but then I would graduate into going to a big box pet store and was looking for the most expensive, glossiest bag of pet food on the shelf. And to me, that was like the highest quality. It was the most expensive. Look at all these beautiful pictures of meats and fruits and vegetables. It had to be the best. Now, I didn't know how to read a label, but this was the beginning of my journey, and I knew that I should be reading the label, but the mere thought of it stressed me out. And so I would push it back in the back of my mind, and, I would be like, oh, I'll get to it later. But, I'm looking at a bag, and I'm not going to show the bag, but I'm looking at a bag of ingredients right now. So the first three ingredients are the most in the bag, right? Now, if I read the first ingredients to you, can you tell us what that really is? What that really is? So, whole grain corn, ground whole grain corn, meat and bone meal, source of calcium, and corn gluten meal, and animal fat.
Feed grade. Okay. Feed grade.
Genetically modified.
Pardon me?
Genetically modified.
It probably is, yes. I think, 80% of all wheat and corn in the United States is probably higher than that. It's probably more like 90% is GM. but it's feed grade. The meat and bone meal. No kidding, and people are probably going to cringe. I'm going to warn you now, this is not pleasant information I'm about to share. Cow dies, it lays in the field for 3 days. That decomposing carcass is picked up by a truck, taken to a rendering facility, ground, and that becomes meat and bone meal. The whole carcass, decomposing carcass. And it's mixed in with perhaps roadkill, a horse that was euthanized. It's anything and everything. Rats, that rat poison around the rendering facility killed, we'll throw them in the mix too. You don't know. That is the unknown of feed grade. Wow. It can be a little bit of anything.
Wow.
A human food facility would never allow material like that to come in the door.
Wow. And something else I also learned too from, one of my biggest inspirations, Rodney Abib and Karen Becker. Rodney talked about what they call the salt divider. So you look for the word salt in the ingredients, and basically any ingredient after the word salt is a very tiny amount. And then they just kind of throw in a little bit of, synthetic vitamin and mineral supplement. But it's very, very tiny. It's just, so disappointing to hear that what's on the picture is not actually what's in the bag. And that was the point of this Facebook Live, is to equip pet parents with the knowledge, empower them to go out and, to know what to look for, because it definitely did a number on my dog. basically a bowl of kibble, a bowl of commercial pet food is a bowl of everyday endocrine abuse. And it's not all of why she's, struggling today, but it's a big piece of it. And if you have the ability to get off of commercial pet food, then you should get off of commercial pet food and feed real food. But, if you, today's day and age, you've got multiple dogs in a household, and everyone, including myself, is financially strapped these days. It's not as realistic to feed every dog, so we've got to give them options and know how to make that bowl better, and what to look for, so that you can find the bag with the least amount of carbs. And, there's definitely ways to hacks, as Rodney calls it, to make that bowl better. And that was really the purpose of this live, but also to tell them, where the ingredients are really coming from, the truth about it.
Well, even some real food, I understand. That's why I only feed half human grade commercial, is because of affording it. Right. So the other half, it's a little time consuming. You follow a good recipe. It's not rocket science. My cooking has not killed anyone yet. Okay. So make it yourself. It's very affordable when you make it yourself, but just find a good recipe, and Rodney and Karen have recipes out there. So
yeah, no, they really plan a pause. They have amazing recipes, $2.99 a piece. They go to the Pause for Change Foundation. I've bought a ton of them just to have. They're awesome. But before we wrap up, thank you so much, guys. I hope you heard it. Daniel Orrego, Susan Thixton. It's been so awesome, and I'm happy everybody tuned in. But before we go, do you have anything to add? You had to tell everybody, one last thing. Daniel, would you have anything?
Sure. Kind of riffing off of what Susan just mentioned. A mental model that pet parents can think about and might be useful is to consider the following. And if anyone's ever seen the Super Size Me documentaries, or any number of these documentaries that look at nutrition on Netflix, I think we all have almost a reflexive understanding that if we ate delicious Taco Bell or delicious McDonald's every day for every meal for the rest of our lives, that might constitute a problem health-wise. And it's not a dissimilar circumstance when a dog is given something that basically comes out of a bag or a can for every meal for their entire life. And while there's not an exact equivalency, there is a tremendous similarity between those two paradigms. And that might be an easy way for pet parents to begin imagining and thinking about how they might want to include fresh foods as part of their kitty or doggie's diet at home.
And Daniel, you've said to me you love Lucky Charms, but you wouldn't be eating Lucky Charms for breakfast and lunch and dinner.
Without question, my friend, Lucky Charms are amazing.
You've been outed, Daniel.
For every meal just isn't sustainable, right? And that's the challenge. I think, that's you bring up a very fair point. I think it's fair to say that kibble doesn't have zero role in canine nutrition. It just doesn't comport with how dogs and cats have eaten for the last 100,000 years of their evolutionary biology, right? Giving a dog or a cat a bowl of kibble every once in a while really won't move them backwards, just like, maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months, having an amazing bowl of Lucky Charms for breakfast isn't going to set you back. And I think if we can, contextualize these issues in that way, it kind of gives people room to make the right moves on behalf of the animals that they love for and care for so much.
Yeah, I agree.
We need to get everybody to flip it, and that fresh food is the norm, and the McDonald's or highly processed food is the Lucky Charms, is the thing you have only intermittently. Yeah.
Susan, so do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think I'm good. Feed food, not feed.
Yes, I agree.
There you go.
And
food, not feed, yes.
And I just want to tell everybody real quick before we go that the reason why I'm on this live is because of my dog, Allie. If it wasn't for her and the journey that she's taken me on, I wouldn't be on screen with you two today talking to you both and trying to get the word out about what I've learned and the truth about everything. So, and Susan, she's staring at me right now. Susan, thank you so much for what you do. And Daniel, thank you so much for what you do. And it's been a pleasure. And also, everybody, just 5 minutes of research a day on your computer, you'd be surprised what you can learn. You don't have to do hours and hours and hours and sleep on the laptop like I did, but just 5 minutes of research a day, and you can really learn a lot that can better your animal's health. And really, that's it. Just about learning and being proactive. And we have to unlearn in order to relearn. So that's my message I'd like to get across. So thank you guys. It's been awesome. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
Bye.
All right. Bye now.
Woo, you did good.